me open with the word of prayer. Father, thanks for this opportunity to be together. Thanks for this opportunity to meet together. And as we meet, I pray that you would be present. I pray that you would guide and direct us. Father, I pray that you would open up our hearts and speak to us no matter where we're at. Speak to us through your music, through your message, and through your word. Be present in our lives, Father, in your name. Amen. As we get started again, we're talking out of Ephesians chapter 5. I'm not going to read them this week. I read the last 2 weeks, verses 18 through 33. The verse that we're going to be focusing in more on this week is Ephesians chapter 5, verse 31. Also found in Galatians chapter 2, verse 24. It says this, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Now, if you look in your bulletin, the title of this week's message is called The Essence of Marriage. And we're going to be talking about the essence of marriage. And what really comes down to is the essence of marriage can be defined. I've told this story before about one of my high school buddies who may have been the biggest slob I've met in my life, who may have been one of the weirdest dudes I ever met in my life, but said that, you know what, Scott, the meaning of life is love. And I went, wow, that's really deep for somebody who I didn't know had any yet. And I agree with him. The meaning of life is love. Starts with God, but it's love. Love for God, love for man, love for the neighbor. So we're going to be talking about love today. I'm going to attempt to redefine what our definition of love is. But before I do that, I have a confession to make. This is my MTV confession moment. And what I mean is simply this. I don't watch MTV very often. I believe that 99% of what goes on MTV is complete junk. This is just me being open and honest. And since I'm in pulpit, I can do that. Most of it's complete junk, complete whatever. I watched some of it when I was in college because my roommates did. I didn't watch it growing up because we didn't have cable. But I got to the gym. I went to the gym. I went to the YMCA on Friday morning, got on the elliptical, and it was like, I don't know, 5 after 5 a.m. And I turned on the TV. And normally when you turn on, it's either ESPN, some sort of sports center channel or a news channel. But the person who was there in front of me had the elliptical on to MTV. And I turned it on, and it's this show. It was called Ridiculousness. And basically what it is MTV's version of America's Funniest Videos. I mean, you've got these guys that host this show, and he just shows a litany of videos of people really from any walk of life, whether it's pranks, whether it's mostly idiot kids. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to stereotype, but idiot kids like trying to do stuff on their bikes or skateboards that they're not even remotely competent to do. So they're wiping out, landing on their head. They had this one compilation. It's called the Scorpion compilation. And that's when people land with their face and their feet wrap around in the back of their head type deal. Apparently there's actually a term for that. And I'm doing my workout, right? And when I do my workout in elliptical, I set like the peaks and the valleys. And when it gets up to the high, it's the hardest part. Well, I got to this point in my workout where I can't even remember what they were showing a prank with a guy who had a fake snake, and this woman was freaking out. So I'm going on level 15 on like a 10 incline, and I'm literally laughing out loud at my television. To the other 6 people who were in the cardio room with me at that time are looking at me going, "What is wrong with you?" Because I'm out of breath because I'm on the hardest part of my workout. Not only that, I can't breathe because I'm laughing. I'm about falling over, and it's because of MTV. And I'm going, wait a second, this isn't right for a pastor to be watching MTV when I don't watch MTV. I don't agree with it. Why do I bring up MTV? Because MTV, I used to be a youth pastor, right? There's something I understood, and I agree with a guy named Walt Mueller. He's one of the foremost, he runs a thing called CPYU, Center for Parent Youth Understanding. And one of the foremost speakers on youth culture in this nation today. And when MTV came on the scene in 1981, MTV kind of defined what youth culture in America was. You don't think about it, but when you start doing some studies on it, you realize the vast impact that MTV has had on youth culture since 1981. Now think about it. Youth culture since 1981 has now turned into adult culture. It's not just about affecting youth culture, it's affecting the way we view our world. MTV sets the trends. He said, you want to know what trend? Walt Miller says, you want to know what trend is going to be next year? Watch the MTV Video Music Awards. Everything that goes on at that will define what culture in the youth is for the following year. It's interesting to think about. All that to say that culture has affected up through adulthood in our nation. Problem is this. MTV's definition of love is vastly different from Paul's definition in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Vastly different than Paul's definition. MTV's definition of love promotes self. It promotes my feelings, my desires, my emotions, and what I want and what I look for. Paul and Jesus, and wherever the Bible talks about love, says the exact opposite. It is not based on emotions and feelings. I'll give you some examples. First one, Mark chapter 12, verses 30 and 31 says this. Somebody asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? What's it say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second, and just as important, is what? Love your neighbor as yourself. Interesting. Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. He says these crazy words that don't make sense. We can hardly even understand them because they just don't make sense, because he says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Ouch. And then we get Paul in the book of Romans. He says this, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It's interesting to think about in all these definitions of love, love is not a feeling or an emotion, but an action. Let me say it again. In all these verses and biblical definitions about love, it is not a feeling or an emotion. Love is an action. Or as your old school 90s DC talk bands would say, love is a verb. I knew you'd like that one, Mark. All right? Look, when I was a kid, I went to Pembroke Bible Camp. And understand this. I, growing up, could not imagine any cooler, better place to go in the summer than Pembroke Bible Camp. This little 60-acre Bible camp in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. You could ask me to go to Hawaii. You could ask me to go anywhere else. I said, no, I want to go to Pembroke Bible Camp for a week. That was the epitome of my existence. What would get me through third grade in school? Knowing I could go to Pembroke that summer. What would get me through? Going to Pembroke. I loved Pembroke. And when I was 9 years old, I accepted Christ as my Savior at Pembroke. I gave God permission to take over my life. I said, God, you're kind of in control. I can still remember it. Cabin number 6. 6 cabins on top of the hill. Cabin number 6, all the way on the end. I even wrote my name on the ceiling like everybody else did and stuff. It was a great place, right? I accepted Christ at Pembroke when I was 9 years old. It was interesting. When I accepted Christ at 9 years old, I'll be perfectly honest, I had this vast conception of what I thought this meant for my life. But I don't think I truly understood what I was getting myself into, did I? And I think we can all agree with that. We're 9 years old. We don't have, the world by. You're just there. And what I found was I had this, when I finally raised my hand, and it was a culmination of a lot of things in my life leading up to that point. When I raised my hand and I said to God, God, I'm giving you control. This is all about you. It's not about me anymore. I want to live my life for you, and I'm not sure what that means. The next couple of days was kind of this intense reaction of, this is the coolest, most exciting, craziest thing I've ever done, with what in the world am I possibly thinking by doing this? Right? It was like electric. It was like you could just feel like something was different, something was changing. How am I going to be perceived by people at home when I tell them I'm a follower of Christ? How are people going to react to me? At the same time, there's nothing I want more than to please God. In a 9-year-old's mind, how does that all add up? How does it flesh itself out? It's tough. It's difficult, isn't it? And I think at any age, wherever you are, when you come to a relationship with Christ, you kind of experience that. Now, I'm 37 years old right now. About 30 years have gone by. My relationship with Christ has changed dramatically. We've gone through the highs, we've gone through the lows. And we've been everywhere in between. And I think you can probably all attest to that yourselves, too. And what's crazy is I don't have that, I have the feeling of sense and awe and wonder of what God's going to do in my life, but I don't have that initial charge, right? That initial, like, man, this is so cool. I don't wake up, I'm sorry, I'm a pastor, this may strike you as a revelation. I don't wake up every morning. I don't. I wish I did. Going, man, I can't wait to get up this morning and go minister for Christ and save some people and change the world. I wake up and I go, can't I just hit my sleep one more time? You know what I mean? Because Christ is still present in my life in very profound ways that were not there when I was 9 years old. But it's changed a little bit in my life. And I'm guessing the same thing has happened to you. Christ's love has been the same the whole time. He's been there for me. He's been my rock. He's been that person, that entity that I can lean on. Somebody I can go to in times of hurt, in times of trouble, which we all have. And it's not easy. but I want that feeling to stay. I wish that feeling could be the same. The same can be said for the way we love. The same can be said for the way we love. See, when I watch MTV, if I'm watching MTV for my definition of love, MTV's definition of love says, hey, it's all about the feeling, that electricity, that excitement, that sense of that first new love. And I'm not just singling out MTV, I'm singling out all media here. It's all about that sense of feeling, that emotion, that charge that you get when you first find that person or that somebody that you love. And I can still remember the first time I held Laurie's hand, right? You're like, oh my word, I can't believe I'm holding her hand, right? And I mean, you're flying high. I mean, this is big stuff. Like, she knows I like her. She's actually not taking her hand away, so she must like me back. And it's this great feeling, right? And we've been married for 10 years now. And when Laurie grabs my hand when we're driving down the road, we're holding hands. I'll be honest, I don't sit there and go, "Grab this alone." Right? I'm like, I didn't use the turn signal soon. I mean, it's different. We want it to be the same. I mean, wouldn't it be great if every time I held Laurie's hand, it was that same charge, that same emotion, that same sense? But see, when Laurie holds my hand now, it's different. Because there's 10 years since we said I do. When it's not that new, man, she might like me. It's, man, we're committed to each other. It means probably more now than it did back then because of what we experienced in that process, in that meantime, in that downtime in between. We want it to be that initial charge. Think about like riding your bike. Think about like riding your bike. Remember when if you learned to ride a bike, that first time you were riding without somebody holding you up or pushing you? Like I can remember it's clear as day. Yellow and black banana seat bike with big old fat handlebars sticking up. And I was convinced my dad was on the back pushing me across the parking lot until I heard him go, "Good job, Scott!" I was like, "What? You're not behind me?" See, I get on a bike now and I don't think about that first moment. I just get on the bike and ride. You don't have that initial charge. Love is the same way. Love is an action, but here's what I mean. You are not going to get that initial charge every time you hop on the bike. And when you look at your spouse every morning, and I've only been married 10 years. For some that's a lot, for some that's a little. Okay? I understand that. We're somewhere in the spectrum. We're all somewhere in the spectrum. You're not going to look at your spouse every time you look at them and say, "Man, it is awesome to be married to you. I am so happy that you are my spouse." But when we watch TV, isn't that the message that's being sold us? When we look in the media, isn't that the message that's being sold us? And the reason I'm saying that is because there's a serious disconnect between media and between this book. We have to recognize that, we have to realize that, we have to acknowledge it so that we don't get sucked down to the view that our society says is right. What does our society say? Our society says it's got to be about emotion and feeling. Problem is, the Bible says love is about action. And here's a sentence, here's a point that's going to blow your mind a little bit. I want you to think about this. When the Bible talks about love, it does not talk about it, it does not measure it by how much you are willing to get, but by how much you are willing to give. Let me say it again. When the Bible talks about love, it doesn't measure it by how much you're willing to receive and get. It measures it by how much you are willing to give. Think about that next time you're watching a television show. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 23. We've been talking about it. Wives and husbands. It's all about action and it's all about giving. There's nothing in this passage about receiving. It's fascinating, isn't it? 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I think it's like 4 through 7. Love is patient, love is kind. Does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Pride is about us, but love isn't about pride. Love is about the other person. Nobody would have liked this definition that we have of love in our society today more than the rich young ruler, I think. When he says, "Jesus, what do I need to do?" Jesus said, "Here's a list of things you need to do." He says, "I have done all that. I am your man. I've covered it all." Jesus said, "One thing you still lack. Go sell everything you have and give it to the poor." And what did the rich young ruler do? He walked away sad because he could not do that action. And his action, why couldn't he do that action? Because that action was a reflection of his heart. See, the two are kind of tied together, aren't they? It's interesting to think about. One of the stats we talked about 2 weeks ago, and this is a fascinating stat to me, 50% of people in our society, in America, live together before they get married. Actually, it's over 50%. 50% of people in our society live together before they get married. And what's crazy about this statistic is the divorce rates for people that have lived together before marriage are higher than those that have not, by a significant margin. Now, I'm going to call this the meatloaf effect, or the meatloaf principle. Now, some of you are sitting there right now and you're thinking to yourself, why is he talking about that protein mix of meat that I'm having with mashed potatoes and peas after lunch today? Some of you are sitting back in your seat and going, man, I'm cruising down the road in my Pontiac Firebird in the late 70s rocking out an 8-track to this dude with long hair and a big gun. Paradise by the dashboard light, right? That's what I'm talking about. For those of you younger folks who've never heard of Meatloaf, he's also a musician. Now, personally, I don't like either of them. So if you ever invite us over to your house for lunch and you want to make meatloaf, that's fine. I will eat it, but know that I will be hiding my true feelings from you. Right? Just being honest. Okay? But then you got Meatloaf, the musician, young people, if you've never seen him, he's a heavy-set dude with long hair who just wails away. And he sings this song called Paradise by the Dashboard Light. And the essence of this song is that a guy or a girl are in a car, and they're making out. And they get to the point where the guy wants to go further, and the girl says to him, if you want to go any further, tell me that you love me and commit to me. And the guy's like, no, forget about that. Let's just keep going. Tell me you love me and want to commit to me. See, I was working one winter of my life, I worked as a plumber, doing residential plumbing. And one day I was roughing in a house with the guy I worked with, and he had his radio on. There's about half a dozen other guys working in the house at the time. Electricians, carpenters, drywall guys getting ready to prep, insulate, and drywall and stuff like that. And this song came on the radio. And these guys, I'd never heard it before. I was like, I was fresh out of college. I'm not a Meatloaf fan. This song comes on. And these guys start talking. Yeah, every one of them, they're singing along. And as soon as the song's over, that is so true. That's exactly what women are like, man. They lead you on to get there where they want to, and then they make you commit when you don't want to. They were going off, and I'm like, I don't even know what this song was about. I heard something about a baseball game going on. I don't even know, right? So I went and I found it, and I researched this Meatloaf song, Paradise by Dashboard Light. People, that's the Meatloaf effect. Why don't these guys want to commit? These guys didn't want to commit because when you commit to a marriage, you are committing to the rest of your life. You're committing to that point where you say, I love you enough to commit to you, to be married to you and only you. And our society says that you're not always going to feel like being married. When you don't feel like being married, just get out. Problem is the Bible says different. It's a Meatloaf effect. Society is focused on our feelings and emotion. And when I look back on my own wedding and my own day of marriage, I can truly say that honestly I had no idea what I was getting into. But that vow I made that day, that commitment to my wife, is my rock. It is not a source of oppression in my life. It is a source of freedom in my life. Because I know that no matter what I do, my wife will still love me. I know that no matter what I do, my wife said those words that she will accept me. No matter what stupid thing I talk about on our lives from the pulpit up here, she may rail on me a little bit when we get home, but she still loves me. It's not a source of oppression in my life. See, we need to evaluate love in terms of emotional desire versus one of active service. And here's the thing. Active service means that there's duty involved. It means that there's something going on, and we don't like that word duty. If we want duty, we'll go sign up for the military. They'll tell us what to do. But in general, we like independence. We like to be autonomous. We want to do our own thing when we want, how we want, when we want. We're not a people that enjoys duty. This is especially true. I'm going to throw this out. This is especially true when it comes to sex in a marriage. We have this idea in our head, and we've been thrown around. that when it comes to sex within the bounds of marriage, and when it comes to sex in general, that it has to be both partners want it at the same time all the time. Now, I'm not talking about on the honeymoon. I'm not talking about within that honeymoon period of the first year. I'm talking about 10 years down the road when you got kids running around, right? And you got to drive them here and there. One's sick and one's crying, and one's just crapped in their pants or whatever, right? And you got to do all this stuff. And you're constantly on the go. Well, guess what? My wife and I are never in the mood at the same time, right? And I'm guessing it's the same for you. And I'm talking about 10 to 20 years down the road when the kids are in high school and getting ready to go off to college, and you got to drive them here and there, and then you're worried about where they're at and what they're doing, and your job's not too stable and stuff like that. Doesn't happen all the time. And then 30 years on down the road when you got vacation to go and grandparents and grandkids to go visit and things of that nature. See, it's not about, society would tell you this, it's all about the passion. All about the passion. You have to wait until the passion is lined up and both of you two are right on with each other. And it's not. Because if it was, there wouldn't be as many babies being produced. Well, let's just put it out there. Here's what I mean. I've read through the Dear Annie column on the newspaper occasionally. I've watched an occasional Dr. Phil or an episode of a talk show from time to time. What blows me away is many of the couples that are having issues, whether it's sexual or otherwise, in their marriage. Like, they say stuff that blows me away. Here's what I mean. They say stuff along the lines, they'll say, well, how often, when was the last time you had sex with your wife or with your husband? And why am I talking about sex? Because it's one of the most emotional and intimate things a married couple can do. It's a physical way of showing your heart love for each other. And it blows me away when I read through these columns or watch these shows, and I hear answers that aren't answered in days, weeks, or even months, but in years. That is unacceptable. But that's the truth. If you're waiting until both your passions and realities are lined up at the same time, it ain't going to happen. Sex can be a duty, and it can still be fun. That's right. Isn't this really the essence of submitting to each other? Isn't it really the essence of submitting to each other? I mean, we bristle when we look at verses 21 and 22 and this word submit. It means sometimes I have to focus on my partner more than I focus on myself. Whatever aspect of your marriage that lies in. It's not about you. Life can be difficult sometimes. It gets bumpy. I'm going to read this quote. This is really good. It's from a movie I like. It's called Grown Ups. A guy with Adam Sandler and all these other guys. And it's about a group of friends who grow up when they're 10 to 12. And they get back together as adults. And they bring their families to this resort in the lake. And they stay for a week. There's this quote. When everything's about to hit the fan in the movie, the oldest lady in the group stands up and she says this. Life can be difficult sometimes. It gets bumpy. What with family and kids and things not going exactly like you planned, that's what makes it interesting. In life, the first act is always exciting. The second act, that is where the depth comes in. And I thought, this is a profound quote. And it hit home to me on many levels. And I agree with him. It's that sense of the first one, like I said, it's exciting, it's new, there's electric in the air. But that's that commitment level, it's that staying together, it's persevering that gives you the depth. Gives you the depth. And it's that depth that's important. Let me say it again. It's about Christ. What did Christ come to do? We talked about this 2 weeks ago. Why did Christ come? To die. For us. We didn't deserve it. An action that he didn't have to do, but he chose to. We are called to do the same. Remember, husbands, I talked about it. We're supposed to treat our wives as Christ treats the church. Christ died for the church. That's where the depth comes in. What is the commitment level that the Bible teaches? The Bible teaches that sacrificial commitment is the essence of marriage. Love is more action than emotion. Again, we're fighting a culture here that values independence, that values autonomy. What will help us, I think, understand this is that marriage is defined as a covenant model, not a consumer model. What you ask is a covenant? A covenant is a deal that is made between God and man. A deal that is made, something that is bartered, broken between God and man. Let me throw this out. When I do a wedding, anytime I marry a couple, there's two parts of the wedding that I always have. One is called the pledge. The other is called the vows. And the vows are one of the biggest parts of planning a wedding for a couple getting married. Well, I shouldn't say that. For some couples, I'm like, what do you guys want to do for your vows? Whatever you want, just pick them out. I'm like, okay. For many couples, they want it to be special. They want it to be different. They want it to be unique to their situation. So some couples write their own vows. Some couples don't. But I do two parts of the wedding that I always do. The first one is called the pledge. And it's usually towards the beginning of the wedding, after I give a short meditation to the couple is holding hands and looking at me. And I'll say to the couple, I'll say, John, John, do you pledge to love Jane? Do you pledge to comfort her? Do you pledge to do this to her before God and all time? And he'll look at me and he'll say, yes, I do. And I'll say, Jane, do you pledge to love John? Do you pledge to do this, that, and the other thing? As long as you both shall live. And she'll say, yes, I do. That's a vertical pledge. That's to God. They're not looking at each other. Who are they looking at? They're me. Who do I represent? The minister. I represent God. It's a vertical pledge to God. But then there's the vows. So once the pledge is done, we get the wedding rings out, I'll say, hold hands, join hands, and face each other. And then they'll look and they'll face each other. Now it's time for the vows. And I'll say, repeat after me, John, do you take Jane to be your wife? Or no, I won't say that. How's it go? I wrote it down. Maybe nobody's going to marry him anymore. That's good. I'll say, Jane, I take you to be my lawfully wedded wife. You know, and we'll do the repeat thing. And he'll look at Jane while he's saying this. And then Jane will look at John and do the same thing. That's the horizontal aspect. Man to man, man to God. Marriage is a covenant. Okay? A deal that is broken, a deal that is bartered between God and man. It is not one of asking, what can I get out of it? Isn't that interesting? Do you ever hear somebody tell the vows or say the pledge going, you know, I really want you to do this, that, and the other thing. I really appreciate that. No. What are the vows and the pledge? You're telling that person and you're telling God what your deal is to put into it. Not today, but from today on forward. For the future. It's not a once and done thing. It's a continual thing. Wedding vows are not a declaration of present love, but a promise of future love and future action. And the question that's brought up in our society today is this. Isn't it true that fully monogamous, lifelong marriage is the enemy of romantic affection? It depends what your definition of romantic affection is. See, we talked about earlier about society's views of love, society's views of sex, how society views relationships. How does society view them? On feelings and feelings alone. And if you're looking for feelings and feelings alone, then yes, marriage stifles that. The first time I held my wife's hand is not the same as I do now. It doesn't feel the same. Look, if you're having sex on a casual relationship, what's the purpose? The purpose is for the hunt. It's for the desire. It's this catch and conquer type thing. Once that's done, where is the depth? There is none. There's no commitment level on anybody's part. It's shallow experience. There's nothing to it. But within a marriage commitment, it's a totally different story. The freedom doesn't lie in your own independence. The freedom lies in giving. The freedom lies in the obligations and the commitment that you made in that covenant to God and to man. Only if you maintain your love for someone when it is not, this is a good one. That's why I wrote it down, because I knew I'd mess it up. Only if you maintain your love for someone when it is not thrilling can you be said to actually loving a person. Not loving their feelings, not living the thrills, the ego-rushing experiences that other person brings, but loving them. See, everyone believes that the Bible's directive is to love your neighbor is wise and good and right. We don't look at that and say, yes, that's what Jesus said, that's what we believe. But notice it is a command, and emotions cannot be commanded. Let me say it again. Emotions cannot be commanded. What can be commanded? Love. Love is an action. The Bible doesn't call us to like our neighbor, do that? The Bible calls us to love our neighbor. And that means displaying a set of behaviors. The best example you can use with this is childbirth. When I have a child, my wife has a child, we together parent a child, what do we get out of that for the first 2 years? Absolutely nothing but headaches. I gotta feed a crying baby. I gotta change diapers. Are you kidding me? I get absolutely nothing out of that relationship but headaches. But what if I said, oh, it's my child. Hey, I gotta change this poopy diaper again. I gotta feed him. I'm sick of this. I'm just gonna give it away. Really? That would turn some heads pretty quick, wouldn't it? We wouldn't think twice about doing that because it's our child and we love them. What's our child giving back? Absolutely nothing. Then why do we expect the other relationships in our lives to be any different? We love that child, and if that child is taken from us, it's taken our heart away. Why don't we treat our spouses in the same way? Why don't we treat our relationships in the same way? Because it's not about getting, it's about giving. It's interesting to think about, isn't it? So if your definition of love stresses affectionate feelings more than unselfish actions, you will cripple your ability to maintain and grow strong love relationships. On the other hand, if you stress the action of love over the feeling, you enhance and establish that feeling. That is one of the secrets of living life, as well as your marriage. I'm going to close today with a quote from the bulletin. It's found in your bulletin. I thought it was one of the most profound parts of the chapter in the book, The Ethics of Marriage by Tim Keller, that I read this week. It says this, it's in the bottom paragraph: to be loved and not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. It is what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense, humbles us out of our self-righteousness, and fortifies us with any difficulty life can throw at us. That is the essence of marriage. Let's pray. Father, I pray that you would just work in our lives with this whole love thing. I pray that you would work in our hearts with how we love our spouse, how we love others. We want to love as you love. But that can only happen with your power in our lives. Otherwise, we're just looking at ourselves and becoming independent. God, I pray that you would shield us from society's definition of love. I pray that you would guard our hearts against that so that we're focused on what you want in our lives. God, help us to love you more each day. But not only that, help us to love our spouses. Help us to love our relatives, our friends, and our neighbors in a way that you would too. We love you, Lord.